Clay as we get to a very infamous or famous episode of Star Trek Voyager, Threshold. I wanted to open this up with a little bit of memory alpha trivia. So, in how many episodes prior to this, outside of the pilot episode, so ignore Caretaker, how many times in these 1.5 seasons has Voyager been given the ability to get home much faster than conventional warp drive? They've all failed, obviously, because we're still here.
Right. 4.
Yeah, that's right. This is the 5th time.
Boom.
Yep.
Boom.
Eye of the Needle, Prime Factors, the 37s, and Cold Fire were the prior examples.
That was all stored knowledge and definitely not a shot in the dark.
You're absorbing all this. It's just Voyager is going to become your series, and we'll go from there. Yeah, so we're here with Threshold. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the show. We've been covering Lower Decks on the Patreon. If you're interested in that, the 3rd season of Lower Decks, so it's patreon.com/thepenskyfile. If you want to go there, support the show, you get to hear some hot takes or cold takes at this point about the animated series that we somewhat enjoy, I suppose, to go right there, right as it needs to be said. So let's get into Threshold. This one is, oh no, I'm all the way at the bottom of the window. There we go. This one is the 15th episode of the 2nd season. Came out on the 29th of January, 1996. The teleplay goes to Brendan Braga. Story credit goes to Michael DeLuca. Directed by Alexander Singer. In-universe date 49373.4, which is 2372. In Threshold, a specifically outfitted warp-capable shuttlecraft piloted by Tom Paris successfully reaches Warp 10, breaking the transwarp barrier. But the side effects of breaking the barrier may cost the crew of Voyager their best helmsman.
I have a question.
Sure.
Do you think that this episode ended up the way Brandon Braga saw it in his head when he came up with
it? I know it's not, although I have specific examples that I think will be interesting to get into. But imagine if it did, if this was exactly, it's like, this came out perfect. That's the Memory Alpha quote from Brandon Braga.
I don't know what sort of mid-90s EDM grade ecstasy and PCP he was on, but whoo boy.
So Threshold is pretty infamous. I think this is fair to say our first famous episode of Voyager that we've gotten to, because Threshold is one that's always brought up as a bad example. I was browsing the worst episode Star Trek blogosphere, and Threshold is on probably 90% of the lists that I came across, like across all the series in the top 10.
Oh, sure. Well, as we know from the Three Amigos, infamous means more than famous.
That's right.
So
inflammable and infamous. So it's got this reputation to go along with it. It's generally heralded as one of the stupidest and strangest and dumb episodes. I think I would open it up by saying all of this can be true, and it's just going to be one of those things that we run across all the time. But I don't think you're ever going to forget Threshold in a way that you forget some of the other ones on our scale. Like, I was looking at some of the ones that we've listed as ones. Things like Resurrection in DS9, which I remember being terrible. It's the one where Mirror Universe Bareil comes over and talks to Kira.
Sure.
I remember it being terrible and us hating it, and we ripped it apart, but I don't remember anything about that episode besides that fact that Bareil comes back from the Mirror Universe. I don't know what his point of view is. I don't know what happens, but I just remember it being terrible. I don't think you're going to forget Threshold, though, because... and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and then I'll let you talk. I'm not a big David Lynch fan, and I've seen a few things, but I have not seen Lynch's entire portfolio of filmmaking. I feel that this episode is somewhat Lynchian, though, in a lot of interesting ways, and it's at least memorable to me. I can kind of see what they were trying to do, but it all falls apart in this really kind of neat way that's like, it's not boring, and there's no just it fades off and it dies by itself. But I think there are some really weird tone stuff. There's really weird character angles that they're trying to get to, and then it all ends up in this place where you could probably write a PhD dissertation about what you think this is supposed to be about by the end of it, you know?
Yeah. I would not say this is Lynchian,
Okay.
I would say it's more Cronenbergian.
Sure.
Because the first half of this is essentially just The Fly.
That's fair. I guess that's fair. I guess I'm leaning into the what does it all mean aspect. Feels Lynchian in a way that Cronenberg doesn't usually. Cronenberg's usually pretty clear about what he's talking about.
Sure. Yeah, I would say if this is Lynchian, this is like the most surface level example of Lynchian you could possibly have.
Sure.
Because I don't really know if they're saying anything important or trying to.
Mm-hmm.
It is so. I would say that while I don't disagree with anything you've said up to this point, I would say that I think this is probably one rewrite away and probably a modern TV budget away from actually being a pretty interesting episode.
Yeah.
But it just cannot.
It's close. It tries desperately.
It tries, but it's so punching above its weight as far as like the stuff it's trying to do with Paris and this idea of, basically turning him into Dr. Manhattan for a little bit.
Yeah, well, even before then, what I think is kind of interesting about it is that I think this is an episode that is one of those, it gets progressively worse as it goes along until the very end when it's bad. But I feel it opens Star, like even before Paris gets his Dr. Manhattan, I've been everywhere and I can see everything powers.
Mm-hmm.
The idea, like I like this idea of trying to flesh out Paris as someone who he's trying to like create a version of himself that everyone will respect. Like he's trying to make his mark in history, and his father was disappointed in him, and he's like his whole life has been a disappointment. So please let me do this one thing, because if I do this, I'll be able to live amongst the gods basically for the rest of the time. Like I'll be listed with Cochrane and all the other scientists that they list off at this point. Mm-hmm. I even think that the conversation he has with Janeway at the very start, when she's like, you have a 2% chance of having a stroke, which is laughable. And then he's like, you got to let me do it. I even think that scene is pretty good, all things considered. It's like, I enjoy that stuff. And I think that I think what they're trying to do, if anything, feels like a commentary on that story, which to me feels very much like the story of Icarus, which is that if you fly too close to the sun, you get burned.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they go weird places, but I think at its core, that's kind of a neat Star Trek story to do, at least how they started here.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, this actually, I think, feels closer to like a TOS episode. Mm-hmm. But the only difference is in the TOS version, it's not a main cast member who does all this stuff,
right,
and then he dies at the end.
Right. Yep. Yes.
And that's probably the more interesting and frankly realistic, if I can use that word.
Yeah. It's a forgivable way to do it here if you never had to see Paris and Janeway again.
Yeah, like I think there's a version where Paris does get bumped from the flight, mm-hmm, and somebody else does it and gets to go through this whole horrible thing, and then you can make some parable about I don't know, something about ego or whatever.
Yeah.
Watching this other person first turn into this like all-seeing God thing, but then it eats him alive from the inside, and he turns into this weird thing. But there's also the version where it is Paris. He does this, and it actually does fundamentally change him in a way that sticks. Not necessarily physically, but like I was wondering, not knowing what this episode was about, when they turned him into a Time Lord there for a second by giving him 2 hearts, I was thinking like, oh, I mean, this is kind of interesting if they're doing like a 2001 kind of thing where he dies and then he becomes like this new entity.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty interesting, especially from Paris's angle where he is looking for a reason to exist and like to do something great, and he becomes this. The first thing I thought of was like in the motion picture when the bald lady gets turned into the Voyager,
right? Yep.
Cipher or whatever, like that kind of thing where he becomes this new creature. Like that would be kind of interesting if they just changed his character around like that, but obviously they're not going to do that. So they did something a lot more narratively efficient by mutating every cell in his body until he turned into a weird salamander catfish.
Yep.
And then quick fix, apparently. Bring him back up to the ship, pump him full of original DNA or some shit, and he's back to normal in I assume 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, with no ill effect, it seems. And I don't know if they remember it or whatever it is. Yeah, I think that at its core, what I think feels maybe it's just a bad misunderstanding of Lynch, or if you want to say it's Cronenberg, is that I do feel that there is a Tom Paris story of trying desperately to... the moral of the story is like trying desperately to get what you want might have bad outcomes for you. Like you can't predict where that's going to be. And I mean, just to go into what Braga was thinking, if you thought that Braga nailed the script, he was concerned that apparently they cut out an ending scene where they explained that evolution is sometimes a devolution. Like evolution is not necessarily moving you towards a higher kind of being where you're more intelligent. Evolution is just a survival mechanism where you're going to fit your whatever needs you to survive, and potentially humans could de-evolve through evolution into like these salamander creatures. And that was that was kind of his point, I guess, which doesn't really fit thematically with the rest of it, unless you want to say that there are like unintended consequences to things, which does fit, I think, the story that they're trying to go for. But they cut that all out, and it even ends up being confusing because there's a line where they're like, they've evolved. I think they even say they've like evolved into a higher being, and then you see these things and you're like, what the hell are they talking about? Like, how is this the end run of where we need to be? But I like your TOS idea about if it's a guest character, you can kill him off this way, and it is the Icarus story because he falls from the sky and drowns in the ocean, and that makes sense. And I mean, now we can just get into the ending. The only reason this is really a colossal failure to me as an episode, and the reason that it ultimately doesn't make any sense is that, and maybe this is why I keep coming back to Lynch, the ending scene with Janeway and Paris feels like feels like we've seen something different than what they are talking about has happened to them at that point.
You mean how the last moment of the show is Janeway going, "Did you ever consider it was me that wanted to fuck?"
It's just so strange. It's this disconnect between what we just saw and how they have to wrap it up, and to have the characters talk about it in a way.
Imagine having to wrap this up.
I know. That's
just I almost feel like Brandon Braga got to the salamander part and was like, you know what? I've taken this as far as I can go. We got a writer's room here. Let's put him to work.
This has got series finale written all over it as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, but he can't close it.
Yeah, and I think the evolution thing is interesting. But again, I do think it becomes more interesting if it is from a point of view of a character who what they want is to evolve. And like, that's not what Paris wants. He doesn't like, he starts thinking that way only because like he's turned into a goop monster, and for some reason that makes him go crazy. But
I think you can thematically tie it in that him trying to become larger than life is represented through this becoming a higher being thing. He's transcending just being famous for doing this and actually like becoming a greater person because of it. I thought that's what they were trying to go for.
And that is an interesting idea. I do think that it's just really tough to tell that story with a character who comes back next week.
Right. Icarus dies.
Exactly. Icarus dies. Yeah. He doesn't get caught out of the air by his father.
Right. And they just go,
you know what?
That was close.
Yeah. Did you ever consider that it was me that wanted to fuck, son? But like, I think the way that this would usually go is maybe Paris doesn't get bumped because of a medical thing, but maybe there's another person on that team who just like prevents him from getting on the ship.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, turns his clock back an hour or something, and takes this thing because this other guy wants the glory. And then when you get into this evolutionary thing, when he starts barking about, evolving, I do think what you're saying is interesting and true. where when you get into evolution, the way evolution is portrayed in popular culture is this idea that every new version is somehow better than the last, which I think is from, at least in nerd culture, probably from 70 years of the X-Men.
Yeah.
Assuming that the next step in human evolution is laser eyes.
Star Trek too, because Star Trek always assumes that every time a species evolves, it's to become like an energy being, that can travel the galaxy.
Yeah, Apocalypse's whole thing is survival of the fittest and all this kind of shit. Yeah. But what survival of the fittest doesn't mean the biggest and the strongest and the one who can run the farthest wins. It means if all of a sudden not having thumbs means you survive better, then people are going to stop having thumbs.
Right. Yep.
So it's not an upward trajectory. It's basically, it's like a river. It's just getting into whatever crevice it needs to keep going.
Yes.
And so to have a character who is dying for esteem and to become something great and then get this realization that, that's not necessarily what's going to go on. That's actually really interesting.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can do it with a character like Paris who comes back, because you get into this situation where he, legitimately, when he kidnapped Janeway and brought her onto the ship and they went warp 10, I said to myself, I have no fucking idea how this is going to end.
Because there's only 3 minutes left at that point in the episode. Yeah.
And they cut to the ship being like, it's been 3 days and we finally found the ship. And I was like, are they really going to mutate the captain of the ship? And then they go down to this planet and they find these 2 slug people. And it's just like, what is going on here?
Well, before we even get to the slug people, one thing I really like about this episode, and that, again, it just makes me feel like those other 2 directors, is that there's a strange, disturbing creepiness to that scene where they're like, we found the shuttle 3 days later. You're like, what the hell?
Right.
What have they been doing? What is this going to look like when they get down there? It's really, the early parts of this episode are Braga's clear interests, from this and early Voyager and into Enterprise. He has a very strong interest in body horror, psychologically disturbing stuff. That seems to be one of his angles that he likes to go for.
Sure.
And I'm all for it. And I think that occasionally in this episode, they even managed to do it somewhat. It has this tone of somberness and something is going to go wrong just because of the way that the scenes are shot and what they're talking about. But then you get to the 3 days later and it comes down to these slug creatures. And then the slug creatures just keep hitting you with stuff. They're they also had babies for no particular reason. That doesn't fit anything. That doesn't fit any story.
Very quickly. Because you got to think how long it took Paris 4 days to turn into one of those things. Mm-hmm. So there's a period of time where he's already turned into one, and Janeway is almost there, I guess.
Yes.
Just looking down through her one weird salamander eye at whatever this thing is. And then somehow in the amount of time between when she finally does mutate and Voyager shows up, they manage to procreate 5 little salamander babies.
Yep.
So I don't know. Maybe it's all sped up because of
warp 10.
The warp 10. But
he's been everywhere, literally. They shoot him with a phaser. They stun them, which I think is always very funny when they stun them with the phaser. The babies swim away, and then they talk about all that stuff that's happened to them. But I feel like we can get back to the ending, I think, because it's the strangest part. But even early, I know that they don't do this, but the tone of the episode itself is making me strongly feel that when he gets to warp 10, there's going to be some kind of Lovecraftian event horizon thing that he sees, because it's played as if this is what the hell, where did he go? What happened to him? And it's creepy and weird. And you kind of get that sense through his, he's falling apart, has that pretty neat scene where his tongue falls out and he holds his tongue up and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But even there, I think an example, and then you can go off of what you liked, the scene after he has his tongue fall off, it immediately, I think there's a commercial break, and it cuts back to him sitting on the floor and the doctor and Kes talking to him like nothing has happened at that point. And it's this weird jump, because I think the doctor even says a joke to him in context about he's going to get to him soon, Mr. Paris, or whatever. And so they can't even maintain that weird, scary, unsettling tone for too long, unfortunately.
Yeah, like there's a lot of that stuff going on. Like even the warp 10 sequence is kind of weird in that way because, he's going, it's like warp 9, warp 9.5, warp 9.9, warp 9.97. And then it's just like,
yep.
Warp 10.
Warp 10.
Did
Peace.
it. All right. I guess.
What did
Cool.
you? Warp 10 is controversial in nerd circles. What did you think
really?
of it? Yeah.
Controversial for what reason?
Well,
The way that they describe warp 10 or the fact that they actually hit warp 10?
no, they describe it in the way that Roddenberry originally described it, apparently. So
really?
Roddenberry always said that the ultimate rule is that no ship can get to warp 10 because if you do, your ship will occupy every spot of the universe simultaneously. So you'll be everywhere. And Voyager brings that up. The people are kind of upset that the show made them hit that mark. They sort of broke a rule like that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't bother me, really. And I think that the outcome is catastrophic enough where you'd see why they would never do it again. It's not they just abandon it. I think that it has a good enough outcome to really inhibit it. But I don't find it troubling to me. Another sort of strange criticism, and then you can go, is the people say that it's a prime directive violation for the fish people at the very end to leave the babies on the planet. I disagree about that too. It's all nitpicky stuff that I don't really think is peculiar. I was just wondering if you did.
Well, my first thought was I was wondering if they've done anything with it since then. Like my first thought was, are they is everybody at warp 10 now in like Discovery in the future? Can they go warp 10, or is this just like this is a threshold that they've never crossed again?
This never been crossed again because Discovery does something different, and this is just different. Another one here is like they never actually in this episode solve how to get off at the point that you want to get off at warp 10. Although they never explain how Paris gets back to where he wants to be either. So who knows?
Well, yeah, I mean, he says basically he just thought about it.
Yeah,
right?
he thought about it. Yeah.
So it's not entirely dissimilar to the spore drive where doesn't Stamets just get plugged in and you just think about where he wants to go?
It's like Nightcrawler teleporting. You just have to imagine where you've been or whatever.
Yeah. So my thought is I don't mind so much that they did it, but honestly, I think it might have made a better movie, honestly. I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The idea of pushing to warp 10, hitting it, and then something going horribly wrong, I think would be kind of an interesting movie idea.
Yeah.
Which I think would afford it a bigger canvas and more money to actualize whatever it is that they wanted to do.
Can only be horror, right? I have trouble imagining anything other than basically what the bones of this episode are saying about getting that fast.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has a lot of potential as a really creepy cosmic horror thing, and like that's kind of what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
When it came back, when Paris showed up, I was like, I mean, there's so much potential for like, what did he see when he crossed over? Yeah. Did he split dimensions or something like this? I think there's a lot of cool stuff that they could have done. But it's actually kind of funny that it goes the way it does because when the show started, I mentioned that. What is the actor's name who plays Tom Paris?
Robert McNeil.
Robert McNeil has big. What's his name? Bruce Davison energy.
Mm-hmm.
And this reminded me a lot of Bruce Davison in X-Men when he turns into the big puddle monster. After Magneto puts him through the mutant machine.
Yeah.
Which in retrospect, I can't believe that was an idea that made it to the film. But
yeah, it didn't work out much differently here, I suppose.
Anybody but Ian McKellen, that idea does not fly whatsoever. You need the greatest Shakespearean actor living to deliver that dialogue. Turn Bruce Davison into a giant jellyfish, man.
It was an effective pitch made to Sir Ian. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I could see it being a movie. I
think if you did a movie, you also could. It would be probably controversial, but I think you could do it with one of the main cast members, if you're like willing to sacrifice somebody.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you want to go to the final edge there.
Yeah. But like if I were to rewrite the episode, I would instead of Paris going on the thing, I would have the shifty Maquis guy who's backdooring it with the Kazon be the one who takes the flight.
Right.
You know, because like that.
That's a
I
weird
can't imagine,
serial story that's continuing. Yeah.
I can't imagine whatever they're doing with him is going to pay off in a way I enjoy. But
is it because you don't even know that character's name at this point? He's just ensign in the back giving shifty glances whenever people are talking about something.
Yeah, and again, it's all spatial awareness stuff too. It's like they were flying. The ship has been flying in one direction at warp 9.5 for like a decent clip. Which how long does it take you to get out of Kazon space?
Yep. Also, the Kazon have been portrayed as like, scavengers of other ships and that they're not great builders. But this guy's like warp 10. You can't reach warp 10. It's theoretically impossible. It's like, what the fuck? Why does
like if they had done so, if they had that guy on the team that was like working on this stuff, and then you have the opening sequence where Paris is in the holodeck and it doesn't work, and then they're talking about it, and then they kind of figure out what's going on. If you had the backdoor channel scene then, and have the guy go, listen, they've discovered warp 10, and the Kazon guy's like, I need all the information you can get on that. And he's like, all right, well, okay, I'll make sure I'm the one on the flight. And so then he stops Paris from getting on the flight. This guy gets on it, and he, goes into the nether realm or whatever. Like that way, I think it plays out a little bit smoother.
Yep.
I probably don't end it with him kidnapping and mating with the captain.
He can just dissolve into a puddle monster, a puddle mutant at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, or something, do something weird. But
yeah, I like that because I think that if you do that and you make it that guest character, you can still have Paris learn his lesson vicariously.
Sure, yeah,
because he can have his grandiose dreams of becoming the next big thing and then have it stolen from him, and he's kind of jealous that it was stolen from him, but then he realizes that maybe it was all for the best.
Or if you want to go a little bit more of a Deep Space Nine bent with it, you get to the end where all this shit happens, and Janeway has a conversation with him, and she's like, so, I mean, are you over it now? Are you happy that this wasn't you? And he's like, no, because I don't know if it was, I think it would still be worth it for me to do.
Right.
Like to get to that point that he wants to get to, to have him see what happened, but then reconcile the fact that it still would have been worth it for me to be the first one.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it's a nice character moment for Paris because I continuing from the start, I do like this. I like trying to flesh out Paris seems to be a good idea to me, like trying to get these characters into some sort of mindset that I can latch onto them as opposed to Paris just being the helmsman of the show who occasionally pops up. And I like that jealousy angle, and I like that sort of drive that ties into the way that he was set up in Caretaker. It's just that he's trying to make amends with his past. He's trying to be somebody. He's trying to do the right thing. And I think that there's plenty of meat on that bone, including what we've said maybe this episode could have done at the same time.
Did you enjoy learning that Tom Paris lost his virginity in his childhood bedroom?
Another weird Braga line. Well, it's a good joke
which
from
the
doctor, though.
Spent most of his time at alone growing up, and then he's like, I've spent most of my time alone, and I once had sex here.
Even the doctors, I'll be sure to put that in your file. I thought it was kind of a funny
yeah. The doctor's really interesting in this one because
he's weird.
Like,
he's weird. In this. Yeah,
he's weird, but I don't think he's out of character because like his whole point is that he's kind of unflappable when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah.
But it does kind of present a weird, like I think it would have been more interesting to play him as more fascinated by what was going on, instead of just sort of stoic and whatnot. So that if you have Kess being like, what the fuck is going on with this guy? And he's like, I don't know, but it's really interesting, isn't it? That kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's so much meat here.
Yes.
But I don't know if it was just budgetary or blah. I don't know what it was, but it clearly the soup didn't come out the way that the picture looked on the recipe book. Let's put it that way.
No, it didn't. But I still, I still think it's kind of a fascinating episode. Really, it's like it's interesting in what it's trying to do. I think what goes wrong with it is that it is a case of it's one of those. It's tough to imagine that the script gets written this way, but it's one of those that feels like it's building to something, and then they're just not sure how to end it. So you have to kind of like clumsily rewrite the middle to start you moving in this direction that you get to the end that is nonsense at that point, because like you were talking about the doctor, it's just this weird stretch of events that happens where he's like, the cure is I'll stay here in sickbay with Cass and watch you over camera as you're in engineering getting a dose of this stuff. And then he breaks away or whatever, gets away from it. But it's just this weird plot beat after plot beat that you have to get to this strange ending that is where you need the show to end.
Yeah, and I mean, also, it's the kind of thing, too, where it's like, I feel like mainly because there is not a lot of character stuff going on outside of Paris in this episode. Like, it's pretty much all on him, and there's not really a B-plot. It kind of ends where it has to end. I feel like you need to see this through to the end. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's going to be incredibly underwhelming and like not even worth your time. Unless because like what's the other option? Is you pull back before it gets too weird, and then what? Who gives a shit?
Then who cares? Yeah.
And so I mean this is one of many directions they could have gone to go that final ending. But like I'm working on something right now where I'm writing it with somebody else, and we have this one big thing that happens towards the end, and then we had another bigger thing, and I was like, I don't know, do we really need this bigger thing? And then we were both like, you kind of have to. We kind of set it up as to have this bigger thing be the ultimate ending.
Yeah.
And so if you don't do it, it's going to feel like a real letdown.
Yeah.
Like
a little bit of blue balls in the storytelling there.
Yeah. There's a screenplay podcast that I listened to that did a really nice, a really interesting episode called Everything That Can Happen Should Happen.
Yeah.
And I may have mentioned this before in one of the various shows, but it was something I had never really thought about. But the way that the guy broke it down was like, you need to wring everything you can out of these ideas. And so if it's a possibility that X could happen, you should probably do that, or at least explore that avenue in the story.
Yeah.
And with this one, I think they needed to push it as far as they could in order to get anything out of the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Do we want to go to patron thoughts then, I guess, and we'll see if the patrons will give us anything we can go off of before our final idea?
My one other thing is, is it not crazy that the shuttles can go warp 10?
It is crazy. I was wondering if that was too far to bring up, but I was like, why is the shuttle so fast? Why is this possible for this thing to go so fast?
Can shuttles? I didn't even realize shuttles could go warp at all.
These are new shuttles. I was looking on Memory Alpha. This is a new kind of shuttle that they've built apparently, and it's not a traditional shuttle which cannot go warp speed.
Okay, sure.
They don't spend a lot of time on that, but that's why they call it the Cochrane is the name of it.
Oh, okay. And they apparently have like 120 of them on the ship. So yeah,
well they run the simulation in the.
It's been a running joke that they just keep losing shuttles. Yeah. So I assume
this is the special one. This is the very special shuttle.
Yeah.
Patreon.com/The Pensky File. If you guys enjoyed the content today, you can go there, support the show. Patreon.com/The Pensky File. There are extra podcasts. You get to vote on things. You get to have secret access to all the special links and whatnot. Patreon.com/The Pensky File. And if you go there, you can also leave comments on upcoming episodes, and we read them on the show. Let's go with Kyle Barrett for Threshold first. I don't know. Let me actually click into what the hell. I'll pull up your little screen. There we go. Kyle Barrett says, I don't know where Brandon Braga gets his ideas from, but I wish he'd stop fucking going there. This episode gets progressively worse, and the infamous final minutes are among the worst Star Trek has to offer, but I'd argue the beginning isn't without merit. Paris's obsession with should be more in focus. That one scene between him and Janeway is genuinely great, but then he just grows steadily insane and uninteresting. There could have been some kind of cool, Lovecraftian, unknowable cosmic horror behind the veil of the Warp 10 barrier, but due to combined lack of imagination and budget, all we get are salamanders fucking. Breaking such a fundamental law in the franchise as reaching Warp 10 probably shouldn't be attempted by a writer, but perhaps that was the point that Braga was trying to make in a meta way, with him being the horny, mutated lizard guy all along. 2 out of 5.
Yeah, it's really strange that for something that, I didn't realize was a rule, it is really strange that they do it with a shuttlecraft on fucking Voyager.
Yeah. That was actually... Yeah, now that you mentioned that, I was surprised by that because I hadn't seen this one in a long time, and I was loading it up, and the question in my mind was, why is it only Paris that's affected by this? Because I had remembered Voyager going that speed, but it's not. He's alone in the shuttle, obviously. So this is Clef with the comment that I just sent you.
An episode that goes down in history as the time Lizard Janeway had progeny. A non-canon Warp 10 never mentioned again. At least the makeup was nifty. 2 out of 5. No clever rating scale. I just can't believe they wrote this shit. Is it non-canon? Do they kind of like retcon this out of existence?
I don't think so. Is the first
or is
time...
it just non-canon because they never mention it again?
A non-canon Warp 10 never mentioned again. I don't know. I would consider this canon. I don't know if there's a reason why it's not considered that.
They all had a meeting and they decided that they should never talk about it ever again.
Never happened. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe they come back and say he never actually reached it. Andrew Cholak says, Threshold, this episode is a few tweaks away from greatness, but sadly those tweaks never came. This is Voyager's random episodic storytelling at its worst, and it gives the worst mental image in the series history with Paris/Janeway. Horrified emoji. One merciful, abandoned alien baby out of 5.
One? It was like 5 babies.
Yeah, at least 3. And the memory off is funny. The guys are talking about the effects work that they did to make the splash realistic when the babies jumped into the water.
There was one guy who missed the birth of his son to work on the splash effect of this fucking thing.
I'll read this next one. It's short. Tim Wahoo says, Threshold, my favorite episode of Voyager after a year of hell. I give it 5 stars. Not everyone's cup of tea, but I feel like Wes will also rate it highly. We'll see. Next is coming to you, Clay. This is Wes Derlin with a comment about Threshold.
Threshold. A few years ago, this episode made headlines because someone successfully pranked and poked fun at the poor peer review practices of a predatory scientific journal by summarizing the plot of this episode. They titled the paper Rapid Genetic and Developmental Morphological Change Following Extreme Celerity. We thank the UFP for financial support. The authors also thank B. Braga for helpful insights. I'm wondering if this episode is so bad it's good, especially with the passage of time. I would say it does check Wes's box for would you show it to a friend. I love their perplexed reactions. 5 vomited hearts out of 5.
Yep. Yeah, those peer journal scams are always very interesting to read about.
I didn't realize that was something you could do. Because as I've said before, I wrote a bunch of papers in college that was just made up of like Judas Priest lyrics.
Yeah.
So I didn't know I could just do this on on an academically like professional scale.
Yeah, you can get into some journal. There have been big organized things about people. It's really done to sort of show how broken the peer review process is.
Sure.
Just because papers that use a lot of like mumbo jumbo and sort of hit on zeitgeisty topics, like the one that recently happened is about like gender as a construct type stuff. It's just like it's writing incredibly insane things, and it gets published in big papers, and it's just because it's a kind of a politically popular topic or whatever. Wes Derlin, you just read that. Changeling, Threshold. What? I don't think this is how that works. Huh? This is just dumb. How? I don't believe this. Of all the stupid things. Fine. Whatever. Okay, done arguing with my wife. Now to watch Threshold. 1, crying in my bedroom, losing my virginity to a pepperoni pizza out of 5.
I will say, I think this takes the cake on top of more so than the 15-minute regeneration of Picard from a Borg as least believable physical recovery in Star Trek.
Oh, yeah. I wonder. I'm trying to think of other examples here. The patrons and listeners will be able to fill us in. Where's someone? Yeah, Picard as a Borg is pretty good. Is there any? No, Worf breaks his back, and that's kind of like the whole episode. I'd be interested.
Kira gets turned into does she get turned into a Cardassian, or is that like a dream or something?
No, she does, but that happens all the time. They alter people.
Yeah. We saw in Strange New Worlds, they got like a hypo spray that does that.
Yeah, it'll fix you right up in the future. Did I read? I read Changeling, so I'm going to send this to you. It's Eric McGowan with his next comment.
Threshold. I'm sure the other comments will point out the absurdities of this infamous episode. To me, the strangest part of Threshold is that for the first portion of the episode, it's not even that bad. Robert Duncan McNeil gives a good performance and the body horror stuff is decent. But then, of course, things go completely off the rails in the last 15 minutes. Insane to believe Braga genuinely wrote those last minutes and it wasn't just a troll job that slipped into the final draft.
What's the weirdest thing about the ending to you?
I think that they come back from it, honestly.
Okay. They just
like
have
it's
a
not
recovery. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's not really I don't think it's that weird if that's the end. Is if they turn into slug monsters and then it's just like, oh shit. All right, well.
See ya.
Bye, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's just shoot them both in the head and fly away. But it's the fact that they have to bring them back that really prevents it from being in any way meaningful as something that happened.
Yeah, where do you put the babies? I just see the babies as a totally bizarre thing to add into it. Like it adds nothing to anything, and it only the reason that it makes the ending seem a little bit strange is that it cascades into this final sequence where Human and recovered Paris and Janeway are talking to each other, and it's just so divorced from reality, as if they shared this very strange, bizarre thing that happened to them, but they treat it like it's any other Star Trek mission that would happen, like that they met the Klingons or something. It's not. They don't even talk about it in a like, what the fuck was that? Like, how did that happen? They're very clinical and scientific about it. And Janeway's like, well, I hope that you won't try anything like that again, Mr. Paris. And he's like, I sure won't. It's very weird. Very weird.
Well, the way Janeway says, I always thought about having children. She says it like she always thought about getting a dog or something.
Yeah.
You know, it's like your entire physiological makeup was transformed into this unevolved creature, and you gave birth to 4 babies of a new species that are still out there. Yeah. And you're just like, well, I just never found the right pooch or whatever. You know, it's very strange.
Yeah, it's really weird. Thank you. Eric Patrick Seba says, I thought I was special, now only feel sad. Oh, sure, kid, job's yours. This ain't Armistead. Abduct, rape your boss, but she's not even cross. Medals made in Sweden, Stockholm, Guidad. But she's not even cross. Did I even read that? I might have fucked that up. All ratings at all times out of a Mobius strip. Thank you very much. I'm not very good at reading poetry out loud, I found. That's my problem. Poindexter G has this to say.
Threshold. Establishing Warp 10 as the next big barrier to cross is a solid idea. An episode about our characters striving towards that could be great. The way we see Paris and the others work towards that is solid television, and seeing them try to figure out what's happening to Tom is also pretty entertaining. Probably 80% of this episode is really quite good, but that's generous. but all of that great lead up is forgotten in one of the most infamously bad endings in all of Star Trek. I just don't even know what to say about the salamander baby ending. I really wish that this episode could have had an ending that was as good as the rest of the episode.
Where does this start falling apart for you, I guess, then? Is it like... Because I see minor mistakes made once Paris crosses the barrier. Like, at that point, he's in sickbay and there's these weird interactions with the doctor. But there's still really cool moments like his escape and like what's wrong with him and the body horror stuff. And so it kind of balances, but it's not purely good. And then to me, it just goes bad in the ending.
Yeah, I think it's really unfocused after he gets back from the trip.
Yeah.
Because they do this thing where his body starts breaking down or whatever, and then he dies.
Yep.
And so he's like clinically dead. but then he is alive again, and then after that point, it's like, all right, I feel like they're just sort of doing weird stuff now.
Yeah, sure.
I think it gets a little bit unfocused there, and that's sort of the first red flag that it's kind of trending down.
Yeah.
But I think it really gets gooey when he kidnaps Janeway. Like that's the point where I'm like, I don't really. If you're not going to go all the way with this, I don't know what you're going to do. And if you are going to go all the way with this, I don't know what you're going to do.
Right.
And I don't mean that in like a good way.
Yep.
It just feels like it's a story dead end that they're going to have to walk their way out of, which is exactly what happens.
Kencito says, Threshold, I don't understand the hate this episode receives. Sure, it's goofy as anything and doesn't make any sense, but at least I was entertained, which is more than I can say for early season 2. 2 out of 5. This next one's quick. I won't even do it. Taxel Bear says, Threshold, hey, it's the lizard sex episode. Janeway shagging Tom aside. How do they even simulate warp 10 if it's supposedly not possible? It's a good question.
That is a good question, yeah.
How can you run that holodeck program to figure it out if it's not possible?
I don't know. I guess you could argue that through like theoretical science or something, you could approximate it.
Well, I guess you could probably argue that they never actually do it on. Well, do they do it on the holodeck? He does, right?
Yes. Well, he never makes it to. Oh no, they do, because after he talks to Neelix,
yeah, he gets the idea to do whatever they did with the shuttle. Yeah, I was going to say that maybe the holodeck can just realistically pinpoint when the wings are going to fall off of your shuttle going that fast. But I guess they do get to warp 10 on it, so never mind. This is Aaron Million. Hold on, I already copied it. There you go.
Threshold. Instead of going negative on this episode, which is easy to do, excuse me, I will mention 2 things that I liked. 1, the Doctor's quips continue to be needed comic relief, such as remarking that Paris is lucky to be alive after drinking Neelix's coffee. And 2, the scene in Paris's quarters with Janeway. It reminded me of the scene from The Immunity Syndrome when Kirk has to tell McCoy that he has chosen Spock over him to pilot the shuttle. Unfortunately, this episode really went off the rails at the end. 1 bad cup of coffee out of 5.
As a patron on the TOS train, and that's true. It is kind of like that Immunity Syndrome scene. Grapple John Zorn says, I say unironically that this is my absolute favorite episode of Voyager. I would rather watch Threshold than wade through any of the 160-odd tributes to mediocrity that are the bulk of Voyager's run. It is a symphony of suckage, a novella of nonsense, a concerto of cringe, and a manifesto of manure. I bathe in its glory. 6 hate-fuck watch parties out of 5.
I mean, I understand. I don't necessarily disagree with that because I feel like they're actually trying to do something here. Yeah. Clearly they don't pull it off, but I'm more impressed and more interested that they tried than anything else.
Well, there was one review I was reading that kind of made my point for me, which is that they're like Threshold is a really bad episode of season 2 of Star Trek Voyager. It's like it might even be worse than Elogium. And I read that and I was like, which one is Elogium? Right. And so that kind of makes my point is that you don't forget Threshold, really. For like it's a strange, weird thing. It's not bad in the sense of it's one of these forgettable Voyager episodes that I can't remember, even though we probably watched it 5 weeks ago.
Yeah.
This last one is Matt Ross. I just sent it to you.
Threshold. Okay, I like some of the ideas here, making a faster warp, the idea of being everywhere in some sort of dimensional travel concept, but that lizard thing that launched hundreds of memes and derision, well, that's probably well-deserved. And what about the lizard babies? What happens to them? Was this episode made to end the idea that Paris and Janeway would have a relationship? What the hell is that out of 5? Mm-hmm. Is that something that they were toying with? Paris and Janeway? I don't feel.
No, I get more Chakotay vibes. Chakotay and Janeway seem to be a thing. I guess Paris is the sexy bad boy, though, that maybe would convince Janeway to break her prime directive.
Is it surprising to you that a season and a half into this, they haven't really paired anybody off yet?
Yeah, it is surprising.
Like the closest, I mean, obviously Kes and Neelix, but they came as a
right.
couple, and
nothing developed from that.
Right.
Yeah.
The closest we get is that the awful Tom Paris stuff.
Yep.
Which nice callback in this though, when he was losing his mind, he's like, "Kiss me," and the doctor's like, "I don't think," and he's like, "No, kiss."
Yeah. Even there, I was genuine. Like I seem to be ultra effective by actors pretending that they can't breathe. I get like my heart starts beating a little bit when that stuff goes on. I don't know. I don't know what it is.
He must have been like hyperventilating or something after doing a couple takes of that.
Yeah, that's it's tough to do. And I thought the doctor in that scene was good. I don't know what his solution was, why he knew what he had to do to make him be able to breathe again. That didn't really make much sense to me, but who cares? That's it. Patrons, thanks very much for leaving your thoughts about Threshold. Patreon.com/The Pensky File. All right, Clay, the moment of truth comes for us. Where does this one fit on our scale of 1 to 5?
I mean, I don't know. It's tough because I agree with all the things you said, that it's like, yeah, it's bad, but it's a memorable bad in a way that the other ones aren't. Like I feel like I kind of have to give it a 1, but
yeah,
it makes me feel bad about other ones that I gave a 2.
Right.
You know, that I would much rather watch this again than most of the ones that I've given a 2.
Yeah. Yep.
But like, I don't know, on principle, I think it's got to be a 1.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the intro is strong enough to give this a 2. Really, like I'm not going to go high and say this is a 4 or 5, but I think there's enough intentional meat on the bone that maybe this is just the way that Voyager is going to be. Like a lot of patron comments have been about this, is like Voyager will occasionally make you think it's going to do something and then it just doesn't do what that's going to be. And this might be like a harbinger of that kind of thing, except taken to its worst extreme. But outside of the bizarre cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs ending, I think there's a lot of weird, unsettling stuff early on. I think that Paris's story is fairly a decent story to tell about Paris. I think that the breaking the warp 10 barrier is kind of a neat concept to move beyond this curtain of like hidden evil that might exist back there or whatever's going on. And then it all just has a weird ending. But leading up to that point, it was kind of neat. So I'll give it a 2. It's a failure of an episode, but it's not one of the worst.
You know, you've convinced me. I think this deserves a 2.
Okay.
Because I can't in good conscience say this is worse than some of the other ones that I've rated a 2, because it's really not. There's more interesting stuff going on.
Yeah. I would maybe that's a good point. Like outside of the ending, I feel that this is a more interesting version of what the season has done so far. You know, it has kind of just a memorable plot line, but it's executed the same. So
sure.
That's it. Thanks everybody for supporting the show. Patreon.com/The Pensky File. All the shows are there that we're covering on the Patreon anyway. And then all the other stuff is on the Star Trek podcast feed. It's on YouTube, blah, blah, blah. Clay, do you have anything you want to say?
I don't think so.
What's the King movie? Where are we in? We're in September right now.
September.
Although no, this is probably out in October.
Oh, it would
so
be
never
October,
mind.
yeah. Well, September would have been Firestarter. And I can't tell you what October is because I don't know yet.
Oh.
Given when we've recorded this, because we haven't picked it yet. But Firestarter, the original Firestarter, not the awful remake that just came out.
Okay, that one was bad. There's only 3 left, right? You have October, November, December. Yeah.
Yeah, I think our options are, well, one December is going to be It, the 1990 It. And I think the other 2 are Children of the Corn.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember what the other one is.
I don't remember either. I remember Children of the Corn and It, but it'll be a wild card, I guess.
Well, give me 2. Actually, I can look it up really quick.
Firestarter is the one that's coming out. And what did you say came out in September is Firestarter. That's what you were saying.
September is Firestarter. August was Sometimes They Come Back, which was kind of a drag for me. For me, anyway. I was not a fan. So it's It, Children of the Corn, and Children of the Corn, Pet Cemetery are the other 2. Aside from It. So going out, I think we're going to be going out pretty strong.
Is Pet Cemetery not a very good movie?
It's a lot of people. It's a movie I think the thing with a lot of these Stephen King movies is, at least the ones that are more the second tier, the second string, as we call it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them have their fans, but they are fans who saw them when they were young.
Sure.
And so they work better.
Yep.
Like, I'm really interested to see how 1990 It plays, because like that's like a milestone movie for me, a horror movie that I watched as a child, which may or may not hold up. Probably won't, frankly. Yep. But Salem's Pet Cemetery, I think, is one of those where I think a lot of people saw it when they were young and it freaked the hell out of them. But I remember watching it more or less for the first time, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and thinking it wasn't that great. So
no, it led to a great Ramones song. So
and stars Denise Crosby.
Oh yeah, I think I knew that. I needed you to remind me of it, but I think I knew that. Yeah, does it star her, or is she just in it?
She is the wife in the movie, so she's the second billed lead, I think.
Yeah, maybe I'm less familiar with Pet Cemetery than I thought I was. Is Cujo? Cujo is not on the list.
Cujo was on the list, but we switched it out for Firestarter because Amanda and I agreed that we didn't feel like watching an hour and a half of a poor dog going nuts and being killed.
Oh, Cujo is one of my favorite Stephen King stories. So I like that.
I mean, it's good. It's a good story, but I don't know. I just didn't. I if I had the option to, I'd prefer to just watch something else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You found your true horror.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Patreon.com/The Pensky File. Thank you very much. We'll be back next week with Meld. And that is a Tuvok episode, if I remember correctly. So we'll be up for our good friend, Tuvok. Thanks very much for listening. We'll see you later.